right, here we go.
Good day, everybody.
Hi.
Here we are. I was all excited. We follow the lectionary on these videos we make. And so this year is the year of Mark. Great stories in Mark's probably my favorite gospel. Then we left Mark to go to John for 4 weeks on the same speech he was giving about bread from heaven and eating his flesh and drinking his blood. And, I was kind of looking forward to getting back to Mark. So we're back to Mark is the good news. The bad news is we're still talking about food and eating and it's still a speech. However, that's what we've got. So that's what we're dealing with. We're in Mark 7. It's not the whole thing. It's selections of verses from this much longer discourse. And even as it was a little tough for Tom to learn. So he may cheat a little bit, and that's okay. We'll give him lots of space. So he's gonna tell us the story. He's gonna tell us the scripture, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. So go for it, Tom.
Okay. Well, this is the story. Now, when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come down from Jerusalem, gathered around him, they saw that some of his disciples were eating with hands defiled, that is, unwashed. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions they observe, like the washing of cups and pots and vessels of bronze. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples eat with hands defiled, rather than following the tradition of the elders?" And Jesus said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition.'" Then he called the crowd again and said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going into them makes them defiled. It's the things that come out that defile. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All these evil things come from within, and they are what defile a person.
There you have it.
There you have it.
Thank you, Tom. All right, so this does start out, as a story with a context. You got your characters established, the Pharisees, some of the scribes, the disciples, and Jesus. I mean, there's just a reference to the disciples because they're not always washing their hands before they eat. And then right after that, you have this for the Pharisees and all the Jews, So it's like an explanation. What does that tell us about the context of what's happening in the story, and maybe even with Mark's context?
Well, a general conclusion from Markan scholars has been that this comment indicates that the audiences of Mark were readers who were members of Christian congregations and were Gentiles. who did not know Jewish customs. And so the reason why he explains it is because they didn't know. And so that has led to a whole body of exegetical work on Mark as being anti-Jewish. And that does not correspond with what is revealed by a performance criticism study of Mark. What becomes clear in terms of performance is that Mark was not writing for a single reader who would read a text. They didn't have text. 89, 90% of people couldn't read in Mark's day. So what it indicates is that Mark is seeking to include in his audiences people who do not know Jewish customs. But the predominant atmosphere, context throughout the gospel is of Jesus speaking to the audience as Jews. He was a Jew. He talks as a rabbi. So it's very important to recognize that this is an audience aside to explain and include the audience rather than seeing this as a narrative comment to readers who have texts that he's communicating with.
Okay, all right. This story is actually quite interesting now in, having, well, we're still living in a pandemic, that's clear. Before, year and a half ago, I probably wouldn't have paid all that much attention to it. But now, I mean, we hear all the time about the importance of washing your hands, not to spread COVID-19 and to keep yourself safe. I actually, when I grew up, I was always taught, wash your hands before you eat. It's a pretty standard thing. I was just in Philadelphia with my little 3-year-old granddaughter, and we came down to eat lunch, and she went in to eat without washing her hands. I was almost scandalized. My daughter, doesn't she have to wash her? No, we don't worry about that here. We wash them after we go to the bathroom, but not necessarily before we eat. So I was kind of like the Pharisees. I mean, do you think Jesus was critical of the people because they washed their hands before they eat? Or was he critical? Was he really criticizing something else that was going on here?
Well, it's interesting. There are ways in which we have come to recognize the wisdom of the rabbis and of this tradition, that there are things that are transmitted by unclean stuff on your hands. And so we pay a lot more attention to that now. But the reason for Jesus being so critical was that they were, first of all, being very critical of his disciples. And that also was an indication of the dynamics that were created by these food laws in relation to Gentiles. For Jewish communities in the diaspora in Jesus' day, there were constant opportunities to have meals with Gentiles. But that was forbidden according to the law, because they didn't follow the legal practices of kosher sacrifice, kosher butchering, so on, that have developed since. So I think the reason why Jesus was so, ticked at this critique is that it was used as a way of separating from people rather than finding ways to bond together.
All right, so they were being judgmental and maybe a little self-righteous in their tone.
Yeah, probably.
Just guess about that. Yeah, because he does call them hypocrites. That's a pretty strong word.
Yeah. And the reason that he calls them hypocrites is because because they make a big deal about traditions that have developed and ignore things that are central to the commandments,
Oh,
such as honor your father and your mother, that's been left out in this editing of
Oh.
Mark 7.
right. Yeah, I also wondered if I'd left out if the lectionary, the version that we're getting, the story leaves out references to foods that are eaten, because it sounds like if the last sort of episode of what we have in this lectionary selection, he's talking about the things that go into your mouth are not what defiled. Are there also references to the kinds of foods that you were or were not supposed to eat? Because that's certainly an issue. They're not. Okay. All right. Well, so just going on to that part, Jesus says it's not what goes into you that defiles, it's what comes out. So and then there's this long list of things. Fornication, I'm going to read them here. Fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness. What is licentiousness?
It's focusing on and being fascinated by things that are vulgar and pursuing those in ways that are licentious. I know.
Okay.
That's a lousy definition, just as you say the word.
Yeah. Envy.
It means being fascinated with, people who are preoccupied with pornography are licentious.
Okay.
And who focus on lust and seeking and paying attention to sexual things in ways that are that are gross.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We don't need to go further with that. Thank you for that explanation, though. That does. So then, envy, slander, pride, and folly. I think it's interesting that the last item on this list of evil intentions or evil, thoughts or preoccupations is folly.
Yeah. Well, Barbara Tuchman has a great book, The Pursuit of Folly.
Yeah.
And she defines folly as establishing a policy or a way of life that one knows when doing it will not work and will have negative consequences. But pursuing that for various reasons. So it's it's stupidity. It's thinking that that the results of a pattern of behavior will not be as negative as they will inevitably turn out to be.
Yeah. So it sounds like Jesus is calling us. I mean, first of all, he's saying it doesn't matter. He's lifting up what's most important here.
Right.
It's not the particular food you eat. It's not whether or not you wash your hands or your eating implements, even though health-wise, that's probably a good idea. But in terms of morality and what is important, good sense for everybody, watching these behaviors, ways of thinking is what's important. And I guess he's calling us to think about our, what are we considering?
Yeah. Internal motivations.
Yeah. Examining our spirits.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. It's striking how much impact this particular story has had on history. Christians, the whole Christian movement has not primarily been concerned about food. There's not an emphasis on how one prepares food, what kind of food one eats as a religious thing. There is fasting, though that's fallen out of favor in the United States. But there isn't a preoccupation or a centering on the issues of food.
Yeah, but there has been certainly a preoccupation with other kinds of things. Whether or not you dance, whether or not you go to movies, whether or not you smoke,
alcohol.
whether or not what's the gender of the person you love, other kinds of things that don't seem to be in the category of the things that Jesus is concerned about here.
Right, right. Well, that was a there were some 600 laws, and one of the questions, and it's a question that later in Mark, the scribe asks, what is the most important of the laws? What's first?
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus' answer is, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your strength. That's the most important. But that was a steady discussion among the rabbis, was which laws are most important and where do they rank? Well, that's what Jesus is engaged in here, is a disagreement with the Pharisees and the scribes who come down from Jerusalem about what's most important.
Right.
And so he's saying what's most important is paying attention to what's going on inside rather than worrying about what's outside.
Right.
Goes in.
As he's saying these things to the Pharisees, what do you imagine his tone would be? You know, how would he be saying for those of us who would want to tell this scripture, or even if you're reading it, you know, how would Jesus' voice be portrayed?
Yeah. Well, he clearly disagrees, but my sense is that his tone is what I would call rabbinic. It is not a diatribe. It's not filled with anger, and but rather is defining an issue, you know, and doing that sharply, but in a way that invites further discussion. So, you know, the saying from Isaiah, you know, well did Isaiah prophesy concerning you hypocrites. Well, that's a strong accusation,
Mm-hmm.
but it's to get attention and is not uncharacteristic of rabbinic discourse. So this is part of a rabbinic discussion.
Would you see any relevant takeaway from this series of sayings with regard to contemporary issues of peace and justice? And I'm going to add spirituality as well. That's another venue we want to explore.
Right. Well, in relation to justice issues, one of the primary sources of conflict, of warfare, is disputes about laws, and what practices, what culture is most important, do we need to follow. So, for example, what's happening right now in Afghanistan, the Taliban are a highly religious group, but they focus on the details of Islamic law and a very rigorous and conservative approach to that, that becomes then the basis of warfare. So they're going to, they'll kill people who do not adopt and follow their definition of Islamic law. The same thing has happened, you know, in terms of defining them over against us, is defining them in relation to certain legal practices that people focus on and make that the basis of major disagreement and separation. So that's happening in the United Methodist Church right now, is that arguments about the law in regard to homosexuality are becoming a basis for defining them and us around these legal issues that are becoming the most important thing. And in the categories of the Gospel of Mark, they are not the most important things. So those kinds of disagreements are the source of many practices that end up being repressive. And in terms of spirituality, this story is an invitation for everyone to do some internal self-examination in relation to this list of the things that come out of a person that defile. This is an invitation to examine your own heart and to identify whether any of these things that Jesus identifies are things that are either lurking, that are in your heart, maybe not have been acted on, but that are feelings, emotions, passions that need to be identified. So this is an invitation to that kind of internal discernment.
Great. All right, thank you, Tom. And
Well, thank you.
yeah, all right, well, have a good week, everybody. Enjoy this last week of the summer. It always feels like when August is over, the summer is over. That's okay. Fall's a great season too, but I'm always a little sad to see summer. To say goodbye to summer.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Well, blessings, everyone.